Crom does not listen to prayers, because prayers are the language of cowards who have already chosen to lose. The conspirators came for Conan in the night, as conspirators always do, slipping through the palace corridors with daggers drawn and murder in their hearts. They were noblemen, these assassins, men who wore silk and spoke of honor while plotting regicide behind perfumed hands. They had grown comfortable in their treachery, certain that killing a barbarian king would be no harder than killing any other man. That steel in the dark erased the distinction between warrior and victim. They were wrong. Conan woke to the whisper of leather on stone, to the held breath of men creeping toward his chamber, and his hand found his sword before his eyes had fully opened. There was no prayer on his lips, no whispered plea to distant gods for deliverance or strength. The Cimmerian had been raised in a land where prayer was weakness made audible, where men who called upon the gods proved themselves unworthy of the breath Crom had granted them at birth. The first assassin died with Conan's blade through his throat, his expensive dagger clattering uselessly to the floor as blood fountained across silk sheets. The second managed a thrust that would have opened the king's belly if Conan had been where civilized thinking suggested he should be. But the barbarian moved with the economy of a hunting cat, his counterstroke taking the man's sword hand off at the wrist. The third and fourth came together, coordinated, trained, and they died together too, their skulls split by a blade that sang no prayer, but only the cold song of Cimmerian steel meeting bone. The room reeked of blood and voided bowels, of expensive perfume turned sickly sweet when mixed with death. Conan stood among the corpses, his chest heaving, his body unmarked save for shallow cuts that were already clotting. He had survived not through divine intervention, but through the strength in his arm and the will that had carried him from frozen hills to a jeweled throne. Crom had given him nothing in this fight, would have given him nothing if asked, and the fact of his survival proved the sufficiency of that original gift. His guards arrived too late, as guards always did when true danger came, their faces pale at the sight of dead nobility scattered across the royal chamber. They stammered questions and apologies, but Conan silenced them with a gesture. He did not curse his would-be killers or lament the treachery of civilized men. Such things were the nature of civilization, as predictable as winter following autumn, and complaint was simply prayer by another name. He had learned this truth in Cimmeria, where the only god was Crom, and Crom cared nothing for the struggles of men. The grim deity had breathed strength and will into humanity at the moment of creation, had given them the capacity to survive in a hostile cosmos, and then had turned away. To call upon him for aid was to demonstrate that his gift had been insufficient, that you lacked the fundamental qualities necessary for existence. Such demonstration invited not assistance, but contempt. The priests of softer lands could not comprehend this philosophy. They built their temples and burned their incense, prostrated themselves before graven images, and begged for intervention in matters great and small. They prayed for victory in battle while their sword arms grew weak from disuse. They prayed for prosperity while leaving their fields untended. They prayed for protection while refusing to learn the arts of violence. And when their prayers went unanswered, as prayers always did, they claimed their faith was being tested or that divine will moved in mysterious ways. Conan knew better. The gods were real, he did not doubt that, but they were as indifferent to human suffering as the sun was indifferent to which crops it nourished and which it burned. The universe was vast and ancient, and utterly without mercy, and it created problems without providing solutions. Drought came, enemies attacked, plagues swept through cities, and in the face of these trials, prayer accomplished nothing except to waste the breath that might have been used for fighting or working or surviving. The Cimmerian had faced death 100 times, had felt its cold breath on his neck in battles and duels and desperate flights through hostile lands. Never once had he prayed. Never once had he called upon Crom or any other deity for assistance. He relied on the strength in his body, the sharpness of his blade, the cunning born of a lifetime spent one mistake away from death. These were real. These could be trained and honed and deployed when necessity demanded. Prayer was smoke, formless and useless, the refuge of those who had already accepted defeat. The conspirators who had come to kill him had likely prayed before their attempt, asking their civilized gods for success in their treacherous endeavor. and perhaps they had even believed those gods would answer, would guide their blades or cloud the barbarian king's senses at the crucial moment. But the gods had not answered because the gods never answered, and the conspirators had died with prayers unheard and unanswered. This was the lesson Cimmeria taught and civilization refused to learn. That a man stood alone in the cosmos, responsible for his own survival, architect of his own victories or defeats. The strong survived not because heaven favored them, but because they were strong. The weak died not because they were cursed, but because they were weak. Prayer attempted to redistribute this burden, to shift responsibility from the individual to some external power, and in doing so, it made men weaker still. Conan had seen civilized armies pray before battle, had watched priests move among the ranks sprinkling holy water and invoking divine protection, and he had seen those same armies break and run when the fighting started, their prayers forgotten as primal fear overrode cultivated faith. The soldiers who survived were not those who had prayed hardest, but those who fought hardest, who kept their formation and wielded their weapons with skill born of training rather than divine intervention. The barbarian king cleaned his blade on the robes of a dead conspirator and returned it to its sheath. Morning was coming, grey light filtering through windows that looked out over a city still sleeping in ignorance of how close it had come to losing its king. Conan would not tell them of the night's events, would not boast of his survival, or punish the families of the conspirators. Such things were expected in civilized courts, but they were also forms of prayer, appeals to abstract concepts of justice or mercy that existed only in human imagination. He would simply continue, as he had always continued, meeting each challenge with steel and will, and the refusal to surrender that Crom had breathed into him on some forgotten day in the grey hills of his birth. The conspirators had failed not because the gods protected their king, but because the king was stronger and faster and more willing to kill. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new plots, new reasons for weaker men to band together against the barbarian on the throne. And Conan would meet those threats the same way he had met these, without prayer or hesitation or any expectation of aid from powers beyond his own. This was why Crom laughed at suffering. Not from cruelty, but from the grim amusement of watching humans beg for help with problems they possessed every tool necessary to solve. The god had given them strength at birth, courage to face the hostile universe, will to endure what must be endured. That these gifts were sufficient was proved every day by those who used them instead of wasting breath on prayer. The weak prayed and died. The strong acted and lived. Between these two paths there was no middle ground, no compromise that allowed for both faith and effectiveness. A man who relied on gods was a man who had abandoned reliance on himself, and such abandonment was simply a slower form of suicide. When the sun rose full over Aquilonia, Conan stood at his window and looked out over the city he ruled through strength rather than birthright. Somewhere in those streets, new conspirators were already plotting, new threats were forming, new challenges would emerge to test whether a barbarian belonged on a civilized throne. He would meet them all without prayer, without appeal to heaven, without any weapons save the ones he could hold in his hands, and the will that no god could grant or take away. This was the truth that Cimmeria knew and civilization denied. That prayer was cowardice made audible, that the gods gave nothing because everything necessary had already been given, that survival was earned through strength and will, and the absolute refusal to surrender responsibility for your fate to powers that did not care whether you lived or died. So ask yourself, as dawn breaks over whatever kingdom you inhabit, whether you will face what comes with steel in hand or prayers on lips. Will you train your body and sharpen your mind and prepare for battle, or will you kneel before altars and beg for intervention that will never arrive? Will you be the barbarian who survives through his own strength, or the civilized man who dies waiting for gods to save him? Crom does not answer prayers because Crom has already given you everything you need. The question is whether you are strong enough to use it. The universe creates problems, not solutions, and it laughs at those who expect otherwise. Stand on your own strength or fall on your own weakness, but do not waste breath on prayers that echo in empty heavens. The steel is in your hand. What you do with it is yours alone to decide.